Hello, everyone, and welcome to Global Gurus, where every Friday we explore stories of international business and speak with industry leaders around the world. I'm your host, Philip Auerbach of Auerbach International. Thank you so much for joining us today. As most of you know, we start each program with a running segment called Faux Pas Fridays, where we explore a funny blooper or mistranslation that does not quite convey the professional image that your organization wants to project. And since today's guest is from Latin America, I thought it would be appropriate to do a blooper from Mexico. And as you will see, one simple word could dramatically change the meaning of the sentence. And it was a sign in a hotel in Acapulco, which said in English quite simply, "The manager has personally passed all the water served here." So with that, today's guest is Rocky Zapata. Rocky has two consulting businesses in Latin America, mostly in Nicaragua, as well as in Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, Colombia, and Puerto Rico. With clients mainly in the construction industry, he consults about leadership, environmental health, and behavioral safety. He has owned clothing stores in his native Nicaragua, where he still owns coffee fields, and he also owns a tourist yacht chartering business in Miami, where his consulting business is based. Rocky has dedicated his life to developing people of all backgrounds and cultures and discovering the leadership they carry within. His online leadership school at rockyzapata.org has hundreds of clients, mostly again in Latin America. Welcome, Rocky. Delighted you can join us today.
Well, Phil, first and foremost, thank you for the invitation. I truly, truly appreciate it.
My pleasure. So perhaps you can tell us a bit about your background, where you grew up, how you grew up, how you came to the United States, and how you got into your current businesses.
Well, it's always a funny, story to say my story, because I was born in the middle of a saga, and in Latin America, we had just finished a civil war in 1979. So the left wing party of the Sandinistas had taken over the country. So we were in a 10-year of Sandinista rule. I was born right in the middle. I was born in 84, right in the middle of that. So when I told you I was born in a saga of crisis, is because I remember as a kid we used to make lines and we would get half a pound of rice for the whole family for 2 weeks, half a bar of soap for the whole family for 2 weeks. And as you know, Phil, back then there was no Facebook, no direct TV, so there were a lot of kids. There were plenty of kids. So within that, it was the perfect time to develop a real losing mentality, right? But my mom, which is my hero, she did a great, a phenomenal job just telling me, Rocky, hang on in there. This is temporary. I know things look bad around us, because that's one thing that, Latin American governments steal from their people is the ability to dream and dream big. Um, so I grew up, within that. And then came 1992 and my mom just couldn't take it anymore. Um, Phil, half of my family were, imprisoned by the current government, and there were no laws. Not much has changed since then. But she brought me here to the United States, to the greatest country known to mankind. By the way, let me put it
And I'm
out there.
sorry, were you able to get a visa out with no problem, or did you have to sneak out? How did you get out of Nicaragua?
Yeah, we had to sneak out because at that moment, with the current crisis that the country was actually facing, they were not letting anybody out. So the only way to get out was you had to sneak out. And in 1990,
And I'm sorry, did you sneak out by boat or crossing a border by
no, we had
land?
to cross the border north over to Honduras.
Honduras.
Yeah, so we had to cross the border north over to Honduras, because they were not letting anybody out. What happened was after those 10 years in 1990, the first elections were held, and that's when Violeta Chamorro, which was the first female
Mm,
president of Latin America, came into power. Even though she was in power and, from the outside, it seemed like everything was okay. the reality is, even though she was president at the moment, the military was still being ruled by the Sandinistas.
Right.
So she was just the face, but the arms, everything was by the Sandinistas. So yeah, we had to cross over north through the border of Honduras, and that's how we were able to escape the country. And I got here to South Florida, where other of my family members were residing.
Mhm.
When I was 9 years old, I remember I got here maybe a month right before Hurricane Andrew. I don't know if you remember Hurricane Andrew.
Oh,
So,
yes.
yeah, they just destroyed the city of Homestead. And because of that hurricane, building codes changed a lot in the South Florida market
Right.
after it destroyed everything. So that was my welcome package here, Hurricane Andrew. I was 9 years old. So that was pretty much my story growing up and in poverty and coming into this country. Now, coming into this country was very tough, right, Phil, because it was a different culture.
Mhm.
Even though I was 9, the language was different, right? I mean, going to school and all the kids speaking in English, the language was very, very different. So it was real tough for me leaving everything behind at home. But we started developing and growing in this great country. And, came high school, and, my mom and I were very poor, to tell you the truth. We lived on a one bedroom efficiency,
Mm.
one bed. So I didn't really know what to go to school for, to tell you the truth. I didn't know what to do with my life. I mean,
Right.
I was in high school. We were poor. I didn't know any better. The one thing that my mom did have is she told me, "You gotta go to school." And I said, "Mom, what do I go to school for?" She's like, "Well, I don't know, but you still gotta go to school." So she didn't know what I had to go to school for. I didn't know what I had to go to school for. I mean, we didn't have any money for school, anyways. Um, and then I remember I was 19 years old, and I had, my mom and I were attending church at the time, and I had one of the brothers from church tell me, "Hey, you want to get into construction?" I said, "Well, you know what? I've never done construction in my life, but at that time, that was 2003, Phil. They were going to pay me 750 an hour. So to me, 750
Yeah.
an hour back then, man, I was banking. I'm a millionaire at this point. You know what I mean? I feel like I was throwing money in the air. Just so I started as a carpenter at 750, and at the time, one of the safety managers, he was from Nicaragua, but he didn't manage the English language very well. There was a language barrier for him.
Mhm.
So he got me, and I started doing his paperwork, and I started translating everything for him, and I was like, this is easy. So that's when I started going, I was going to college at the time, Miami-Dade College, and then
Mm.
FIU. And that's when I started getting into the whole safety arena, because I was doing his paperwork, I was doing everything for him. To me, it was good because I got to be in the air conditioning and not out in the sun with the other construction workers at 19 years old.
Right.
So I told him, I'll translate anything you want me to translate for you, buddy. So, I usually get the question, what was the secret sauce of my growth? I think it was being bilingual in South
Mm.
Florida. I
That's
mean,
great.
because, I went to school, and then I started working for a company.
Right.
Um, I started working for a company at 23 years old as their safety director. At that time, now at 23, as their safety director, I was already making about 80,000 a year at 23 years.
Wow. That's
Yes,
fantastic. That
I
is a
was young.
billionaire salary for you.
Yeah, I was no, that was billionaire. That most definitely I was billionaire. So at that time, I saw the need and I saw the
Mm.
niche, Phil, of a lot of companies, smaller companies that maybe couldn't afford a
Uh-huh.
safety professional like myself, the need of needing safety. So they started calling me because I knew the Spanish language, and I can actually
Right.
communicate with their Latino workforce. Not a lot
Right.
of people could communicate with their Latino workforce. So in 2014, I took the leap of faith, and I said, you know what? I'm gonna venture on my own. I'm gonna start Rocky Zapata Safety Consultants. I was a little worried because I was accustomed to the weekly paycheck. That Friday
Mm.
that check
Fun.
came in, and I was
Yeah.
real happy because the check came in. But I had some savings there. And in 2014, I took the leap of faith and I started Rocky Zapata Safety Consultants. And within a year, I already had 3 safety professionals working for me. It was rapid growth.
Wow, that's
It was,
fantastic.
yeah, it was rapid growth just because of the language, Phil.
That's
Because of
great.
the language, they needed someone to speak the Spanish language to their Latino workforce. So from there, I grew and I started venturing out and opening other businesses and starting doing conferences and opened up my yacht business and did many, many, many things from safety. So safety was really, really good to me.
That's outstanding. Two quick questions about your family. You mentioned you and your mother. What about your father and your siblings? Did they come with you?
So no, when I mentioned earlier that they had a lot of kids was because my grandmother from my maternal grandmother, she had 13 kids, and my paternal grandfather, he had 33 kids.
Wow.
So I had many, many, many cousins. I mean, I can win a presidential election in Nicaragua with just my family, right? I'll
Yeah.
definitely win. But my mother and my dad, my mom only had me, so I was an only child. I am an only child. So I'm an only child from
Mhm.
my mom. We grew up together. My dad stayed back home. You know how the old man used to be the big machista.
Yeah.
I'm the man, and I get to have 100 women. My mom didn't roll that way. She said, "No, well, you can keep 99, but I'm out of here." So I have other siblings back home, actually in home in Nicaragua and Guatemala. So my dad actually was back and forth. He had a welding business
Oh,
where so he was back and forth. So I have some siblings in Guatemala and Nicaragua, but very limited
yeah.
contact with them because I grew up by myself, just my mom and I.
It's fascinating. It's great and unusual for Latin Americans. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, but not anymore today. For women have, they have awakened. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me about your experience with Latin America business. Um, how would you characterize, I guess, some of the similarities and some of the differences with the US?
Well, I'll start with this, with the difference with U.S. and Latin America. First and foremost, I'll dive in a little bit into Nicaragua, and I'll tell you that in most Latin American countries, there is no open or free society.
Mm,
Okay, so these countries actually have no laws. These countries have no regulations whatsoever, and these countries are 100% managed by the government.
mm,
So let me give you a quick example. Quick example for you. I was in Nicaragua last week.
uh-huh,
Um, I went to see some of the coffee fields, and I was there last week, and it's so unsafe. I promised myself I'm not gonna go anymore because I have a 10-year-old daughter, and
mm.
I want to be around for her. So I promised myself not to go to Nicaragua for at least 2 to 3 years until everything settles down. But as I was there last week, the biggest pawn shop, okay, in Nicaragua, which is Casa de Empeños in Spanish, their name is Prisa, okay, a pawn shop. I mean, the government completely seized all their 20 locations around the nation.
Mm,
Okay. They took gold. Imagine you having a gold chain and going to the biggest pawn shop in Nicaragua and, getting $300 for your gold chain, and you're saving money to go get your chain back. And now the government, they went in all 20 locations in the country.
mhm.
Because remember, Nicaragua is not a big country. It has just a little bit more than 6 million
Right,
people. And the political, the financial market, everything is centered in Managua, the capital. Like
right.
89, 90% is centered in Managua, and
Mhm,
the other 10% is distributed throughout the country.
right.
So the government went in, okay, and they literally seized just everything from Prisa, from that pawn shop. So they
Mm,
literally took everything. I mean, gold, silver, equipment, anything you can think of. Employees were held hostage
mm,
for more than 18 hours. Imagine you're just an employee. I mean, I just
mm.
go there to work. They were held hostage for more than 18 hours.
Wow.
So
But
in
Rocky,
Latin America and Nicaragua, where I've done, the majority of my business, the difference to the US, no laws, no regulations. You go in there, you do business, You don't know when it's going to end, but it's not going to end because you sell your business. It's going to end because the government ceases your business and they take over your business as a whole. So it's a huge difference from that market to here.
Well, but Nicaragua basically is a dictatorship, and that's the case in most dictatorships. What about places like Mexico and Colombia and other countries that are supposed more democratic?
So places that are more democratic per se, through the outside, through the
From the
outside
outside,
field, right?
yes.
So I'll give you a quick example. Let's talk about Colombia per se, right?
Uh-huh.
So Colombia, they has the more per se out democratic lining in government than most of them. Business differs over there because per se you get a lot more cheaper labor in these countries. So that is one of the reasons why a lot of businesses shift, right, per se, to Mexico, to Colombia, because what you would pay here in the US $20 an hour,
Right.
you can literally pay in Colombia at $5 an hour, right? So the
Uh-huh.
lifestyle is different. I mean, give you a quick example. My neighbor, he is the vice president of HBO Latino, right? You know, the HBO. So he's the VP of HBO Latino. So HBO Latino, when the Biden presidency entering January 2021, they started just closing shop here in Sunrise, Florida, because the tax, right? I mean, the tax hits they were going to get from the government were huge. So they shift all their operations down to Chile, okay, in Latin America. And my neighbor tells me that what they would pay an engineer here, per se, $130,000, they are paying an engineer over there $10,000. And this is annual salary, right? On
Right.
both sides of the aisle. So in Latin America, where you have just a little bit more of democracy, I mean, labor is going to be cheaper. Depending on the government, you'll get a lot of tax cuts in Latin America. And that's because, most of the time there is no laws or regulations. So it's a lot easier per se to buy out your local politicians and get lower. I mean, way lower. It's the corruption is huge. I hate to say that on your podcast, but it's just a massive
There it
load of
is. It's fine.
corruption there. It's
Yeah.
a massive. I mean, it's massive. You literally have to have the right connection, and you're gonna be golden with business. It's just, I mean, I'm sure you heard. Remember when the whole Odebrecht,
Yes.
the whole Odebrecht, and
Brazil.
Odebrecht's big, one of the biggest construction companies in the world. I did some work for them here in the Miami International Airport. I did some consulting for Odebrecht.
And sorry, for our listeners, it's Aldebrecht, and it's a German company that was working in Brazil, right? And this was a scandal.
That is here the huge scandal where they were buying out. I mean, Peru, Brazil, Chile. They were buying out all these governments, and they were getting all the construction contracts. And people were saying, "Why is Odebrecht, winning everything all over Latin?" I mean, they were literally buying land. They were literally building Latin America as a whole. But it was a huge scandal. Yeah. So, I mean, huge difference with doing business over there. I mean, doing business here, as obviously we have a free and open society. So it's a lot, it's structured better for business owners, obviously, depending on governments also here, where you fall with certain tax brackets and certain codes that the government puts out for businesses.
What about just in a normal office in terms of a management style? How would that be in terms of the employees versus the managers?
So the style in Latin America is very different because the majority of Latin American countries are still in a third world management style. Some of them are fifth world, like Nicaragua. So you can say there's probably little to zero education to a certain extent, where there's not a lot of respect back and forth from managers, right, to employees. The lack of pay at times, most of them, do not care. And so there's just a little battle back and forth, and there's not the respect that you actually can find here within laws and regulations with that type of management style. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult.
Is it extremely top down? The owner, the manager says this is what you do, and the workers do it, or there's
That's
a
it.
growing middle class. So do the middle class workers ever suggest, well, well, patron, well, boss, there's another way to do it, and perhaps we should consider it this way.
Right. So in third world countries, there's not really a middle class. That doesn't really exist like, per se you can have in the US, in a US market. So
Right.
there's not really a middle class, whatsoever per se. So it just pretty much comes down to another dictatorship at the workforce. So it's pretty much, this is what you do. You have to do it. This is the pay, no it's or buts. So, and people have to eat,
Right.
people have to work, people have to feed their family. So the majority of the time, it's the way it's going, with that type of management and things out there in Latin America.
Okay. Well, there are educated people, of course, and
A ton, yes.
yes, and in Colombia and Peru, so forth. There, in Mexico, there are middle class people, and so when they're in these companies, um, would they be able? Would they generally be able to suggest alternative ideas, or does it totally depend on the company?
So a lot of it depends on the company, Phil. I mean, I'm gonna give you a quick example, right? Chile.
Mhm.
Chile has massive educated people. I mean,
Right.
massive,
Exactly.
right? I mean,
Yes.
big, big. And if you go to per se to an organization like Chile, a country like Chile, into one of their top big organizations, it really comes down to the company, and what they take in accountability for their people. So when you have Chile, which has a lot of educated people, yeah, I mean, the middle class, or you can say that type of middle class, a lot of their opinions into where the company should head, or the path the company should go, it is taken into consideration. But ultimately, lastly, it's almost still a dictatorship where
Mm.
we'll take your opinion into consideration, but we're going to decide the way we go from here.
Right.
So it's, even though it is taking some, it's little to none. In other words, it's more
Mm.
to give these employees the feeling that, yeah, they're taken into consideration. It's tough out there.
Huh.
It is tough.
What about cultural issues? I'm sorry. Let me go stick with the management issues. In terms of marketing or packaging or pricing, how would that differ in Latin America from here?
Well, so let's touch base, right, per se, into like marketing, correct?
Right.
I mean, I know what everyone is thinking, correct? I mean, or most people I talk to, right, feel they're like, well, Latinos are Latinos,
No, they're
and even
not.
and
No.
even thought this is a true statement, and hear what I'm going to tell you. Even thought this is a true statement,
Right.
it is still far from the truth, right? If that makes any sense,
Yeah.
um, whatsoever. So, I mean, I give you an example. Nicaragua, right? Nicaraguans have a different per se dialect, accent, lingo, culture, and temperament, or temperament than to say, Argentinians, or even Mexicans, right?
Hmm.
So when you actually market to a Latino, you have to use their local or their demographics to establish per se some sort of a strong marketing plan. So you have to know per se which country and tradition you're targeting with that marketing, because even though we are per se all Latinos, it's just we're Latinos, but we're so far away at the same time. So
Right.
I mean, I'll give you an example. Last week I was at a business conference, and one of the attendees asked, and he says, "Hey, can I translate my English language into Spanish?" Right, and unfortunately, I told him that might not be as successful. You know what I mean? If you want to just per se apples to apples, English to Spanish. So the marketing is different. The language is different. The culture is different among them. So everyone has their own set per se country of their own marketing, their own identity. Like Mexico says, hey, Mexico is Mexican. You know what I mean?
Right.
and we are the Mexicans, and you go to Costa Rica, and the Costa Ricans, tell you pura vida, maje, we're Costa Rican. So it's challenging, but it's fun at the same time, because even though we are all Latinos and we speak per se the Spanish language, it differs huge with them.
Well, since you teach leadership through your online school and you teach safety, are there differences in how you would approach people in Costa Rica, for example, versus Mexico versus Colombia?
So yeah, there's a huge difference in how to approaching them. Now, when I do approach them, I use my Latino side, and let them know, hey, I'm Latino, I'm from Nicaragua, you're Mexican, you're Argentinian. You understand we're gonna differ. I mean, even in food, right? We differ even in food, per se. So my approach to them and the leadership is always trying to connect with them. So when I got Mexicans in front of me, I've got great Mexican friends and love the Mexican people. And I know a lot about politics in Latin America, so that helps me out a lot.
Right.
I start, when I say speak about politics, not going one side or the other, that never ends well. But I start talking about their history. You know what I mean? Who's in power now? What's happened before he entered power? How is it going now? How is it going with business? The food, the tacos. I start naming places I've been to in Mexico. So I just connect with them at that moment, and I think it sparks the love between the Mexicans and I, per se, in this case. So I always try to get personal with them one on one from where they're at, and Latinos appreciate that a lot.
But is there an approach or certain words, for example, that you can say to a Mexican that you can't say to a Colombian as you're teaching?
All the time.
Like what?
So per se, I'll give you an example. Actually, I was in Colombia. You're gonna laugh at this one.
And I don't mean the individual words that are slang or have different meanings, but when you're teaching leadership, are there concepts that you can say to Mexicans that don't resonate at all with the Costa Ricans or the Colombians, for example?
So per se, if there's no slang, I try to keep my Spanish at a center, right at a center level.
Right.
I mean, I try to use the professional, if you can, the right correct words, that come from La Real Academia, right? Try to use the academy words that everybody kind of knows. So I try to navigate always on those words. Now, the lingos per se, or certain words, which as Latinos we change them around. So per se, I was in Colombia, and in Nicaragua, saying calentura means you have a fever. I have a fever, but saying calentura in Colombia, it means you want to have sex. So it was like, and people are looking at me weird, and I say, hey, what did I say wrong here? But I guess I connected with people, and that, even with that, I even connected with them, and they were laughing, and we got into it, and it was great. So no, I mean, even though I try to connect, depending on their culture, I try to connect with them one on one. I try to always use, the overall general Spanish when I visit these countries.
Right. But again, in terms of leadership concepts, Latin America is very top down, right? So are there concepts of leadership that you would teach in Mexico that apply to Mexico that do not apply in other countries?
No, so our leadership course, Phil, is pretty much leadership. I mean, down the line, the leadership that I've learned here. So I think the leadership that we learn or we have in the United States is the model for Latin America. I mean, Miami, South Florida is known as the capital of Latin America, right?
Right.
So even with safety, right? I mean, even with safety, everything is from the U.S. OSHA, we want the U.S. OSHA. Safety, we want the U.S. safety. Environmental and health, we want the leadership, we want it from the U.S. Because remember, we are first world and we are ahead of Latin America. So whenever you teach leadership or even safety or anything of that nature, everyone literally wants it to come from here. because the whole world views us as the example of what leadership, safety, finances, life. We are the leaders, and they view us as, they want to learn our model to be able to move forward. I mean, even Pinochet, which was the Chilean leader, dictator,
Right.
back then, when he entered power in 1973, he literally got 9 economists, okay, and he sent them over to the University of Chicago, which I believe they were the Chicago
Right.
boys,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yes.
And he says, "Listen, I want to learn U.S. economy, right? Because I want to grow Chilean economy."
Right.
So these
She did.
9, they came to the University of Chicago, learned U.S. economy, went back to Chile, and grew the Chilean economy in that time. So we are the model for them, Phil. So to answer your question, no, they want U.S. leadership, and it's across the board in Latin America.
Okay, so one of the aspects of US leadership is soliciting opinions from your managers, for example, and getting input from many people about how to improve your company, your products, your services, whatever they may be. But you also said that the typical style in Latin America is top down. Thank you very much for your advice. This is what you are going to do. So in a way, learning US leadership and learning, well, safety may be different, but learning US leadership styles doesn't really matter because they're not doing it anyway.
Well, they're not doing it anyway. You are correct, but they still want to learn it. They still want to hear it. I'll give you a quick example. I was in Guatemala some time back, and I was, speaking to a CEO of a hotel chain, and I told them, listen, I said, you know what you need here? You need more training, right? Unfortunately, you need your management to be trained, right? You need your managers to be trained, your managers to learn how to hear their employees. You need to, you need some of that training. And he was, very good with it. He's like, you know what, Rocky, you're right. I do need some of that. And then he called one of his managers, which is below him, and he's like, hey, listen, this is Rocky's suggestion. We should have some training. So we're going to bring all the managers together, and we're going to have this and this training on how to listen to people. Guess what? Even though the CEO was receptive, right, to this, the manager says, well, why are we going to train the other managers? How about if they leave? Right? So we're going to train them.
What if they leave, right?
What if they leave? And then, I was shocked, at it, because the CEO saying, hey, I want this. I want to change the culture. I want to do something about it. Here comes the manager and says, well, why are we going to train people? How about if they leave? And the CEO came back with a great response, right? With a mic drop. And he's like, you know what? What happens if they stay?
Good. Perfect.
So it was, I didn't even give that response. That came directly from him. He's like, hey, what happens if they stay?
Right.
And I said, and I thought that was the best response I've heard from a CEO in Latin America, by all means.
Absolutely.
So it was great, but you can just see the mentality where managers are at. You know what I mean? It's like, who cares? You know what I mean?
Right.
Just, why train people? They're going to leave. He's like, no, what if they stay? And that is what we have to look at. So, and part of teaching leadership to Latin America and these leaders, Phil, is, teaching them the love for people, right? And part of having love for people is you want to build people up, even if one day they leave you. It is what it is. I always give the analogy of the father and son analogy for those who have kids. I says, you do good for your kid, you educate your kid, you want your kid to grow and be somebody, even though one day he's gonna leave you. He's gonna do his own life, or she's gonna do her own life. Right. And that's what really leadership, trickles down to. You want to make sure that all your employees, they learn, you educate them, you prepare them. And even though one day they leave, you understand that you did your part as a leader to developing these people.
That's fascinating. You're right. In terms of, well, you mainly deal with the construction industry. Do you deal with at all with service industries, hotels and shops and things?
We do. So the bulk of our business, 80% is construction. The other 20%, we do banks, daycares, restaurants. Restaurants are the best because they always want to feed me. They always want to feed me, you know. It's like, guys, nothing different is gonna come out if you feed me for free, you know. Restaurants, some mechanic shops. So yes, we have that 20%, which we call the actual general industry.
Mhm. Um, in my experience in Latin America, at least in the tourist destinations, the service is generally very good. Um, but when I've gone to banks, the service is terrible because the tellers will just take time and talk to the customers and talk with each other and all of that. And in this country, there's the sense that time is money and efficiency, and you just serve the customer and move them through. Whereas in other countries, it's much more, again, casual and friendly and slow and a person-to-person relationship, which is great, except if you're in a rush and you want to get somewhere, get something done. So when you teach service, you're saying that they value United States methods, but do you teach this idea of serving the customer and moving on, and instead of just talking and talking to your customers about their families and about their friends and all of that more casual?
Well, the thing with that, Phil, is that so Latinos communicate through relationships. That's just a part of per se who we are as a culture. So Latinos are big on faith, family, food, fiesta, sports, majority soccer or baseball, depending on the country. So in reality, Latinos connect to these things. And because they connect to these things, they connect to other Latinos with it. We're very, hug you and handshake and one kiss here, another kiss here. So that's just who Latinos is, and it's really tough to change that and
Right.
And I know exactly what you're referring to, because you're at a bank and the guy's talking. Hi, did you see the soccer game last night? Yeah, and then you just
Yeah,
go on
exactly.
and us that we come from a different type of method per se, right? A different type of system. We're here. This is like on the clock, baby. We're moving. You know what
Right.
I mean? So even me, I lose it sometimes. I'm like, hey guys, I mean, I know you guys, lovey dovey here, but there's a whole line. So it's tough to change that because that's just who Latinos are. They're big on community. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
that's how they actually communicate.
got it.
So it's a tough one, Phil, but it is a tough one on that one. I can't help you there much.
Yeah.
I even have a tough time when I travel with that myself.
All right. Good to know that I'm not I know I'm being very American when I go there and I start feeling feeling that, and just accept it. But
Well,
yeah,
because you know how the system here, we're always running.
right.
I mean, I run 3 businesses here, so it's like business from here, from here. Yeah, every business has a manager, but you know how it is. You got to connect with these people, and they're calling you and here, and it gets overwhelming here. That over there, I mean, still today, some places in Latin America, I mean, the doctor goes to lunch 3 hours. Yeah, it's like I was in Matagalpa the other day. When I was in Nicaragua last week, and Matagalpa is just maybe 2 hours from the capital, Managua. And sign outside, I'm out to lunch. I'll be back at 3:30, and it's 12:40. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, how long is this guy's lunch? You know what I mean? They go, they eat, they say hi to the kids, they sleep, they wake up, and when everything's done, they get back to the office at 3:30. So, it's just that type of culture.
As I've said on other podcasts, I used to live in Africa,
All
and
right.
things there work on what we call Africa time. So if you go to a theater, a show of any kind, uh, the starting time is 8 o'clock, which means that
Right.
everyone starts arriving at quarter of 8, And in the lobby, you have to greet everyone, because you know people. How are you? How are your children? How's it going with this particular situation? I hear you just, you got a new car, you got a new pet, whatever. So you have to talk to people because it's all about relationships. And maybe around 9 o'clock, 9:15, 9:30, that's when the show will start.
Yeah. Exactly, Latin America, right?
Right. Exactly.
Relationship with people, that's who we are, and we like hugging a lot,
Yeah, hugging a lot.
and shaking hands and kissing everybody. So it's just a Latino thing.
Very good. Thank you. Um, is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we close?
I mean, no, I think we've talked a lot. One of the things I always, tell people, even going back to, you know, our initial difference between, Latin America, or some Latin America countries, third world ones, the dictatorships, and the US is, in the US we have huge checks and balances.
Right.
Latin America, some places have zero checks and balances, so it's a huge difference, right?
Right.
With doing business over there, and this is majority Latin American countries, right? One person dictates everything, even in some democracies per se. So you got to go through one person. Here we got plenty of checks and balances. You got to go through a lot of people, and a lot of people meet each other in other ways. So it's a huge difference than doing business in Latin America. So it's been great, doing business in Latin America, doing business here, and I'm hoping one day things get better, and we go back, and do some more business in the Nicaragua country.
I'm sorry, there is one other issue that I forgot I wanted to ask you, and that's about the male-female relationships. So if a woman wants to buy a car, for example, first of all, I know in Latin America, if there's a car, it's a family car as opposed to here, or, the husband might have, the wife might have, whatever. But if a woman wants to buy a car or buy, I don't know, clothing, but something substantial for the house, for example, does the husband generally have to go along and go with her, or can she do it on her own, or what's the relationship there?
Depending on the husband, probably, I would say. I mean, the majority, it's changed. The culture has changed a lot,
Yeah.
Phil, and I know exactly what you're talking on. So the culture has changed in the last decade. Tell you
Mm,
the truth, before it was like whatever the man said, can I buy this? No, 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 no. Culture has been shifting a lot in Latin America. Women have been waking up and says, I'm not your slave guy. I have my own mind, right? I have my own thinking. I can go buy my own things. And now, women work. So you got a lot of women in the workforce, a lot of women that make their own money. I think that culture comes a lot, Phil, before, because the male figure per se, the father of the family,
right.
he was the breadwinner.
Right.
So he's the one going out, bringing the money. They would have a lot of kids, and the wife stay home and take care of the kids. So
Right.
I think that's where that mentality came from. Now you have a lot of professional women in Latin America.
Mm,
Um, Even if they're not professional, they're taking crap from a man. You know what I mean? It don't matter which side they're on. So I think just around, women have waken up, so they're taking more of their own decisions now, rather than waiting for their men to do it.
oh, that's very refreshing to hear.
It is. It is.
Thank you so much. Um, so this has been a wonderful talk with Rocky Zapata, and it's been a wonderful pleasure again to gain your insights today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Phil. I appreciate the invitation.
So this has been Philip Auerbach. Please join us again next week for another edition of Global Gurus and their stories of international business. And if you'd like to connect with me, our website is auerbach-intl.com. Thank you so much.